Very
It's my
cool.
pleasure. I just literally jumped off of a podcast. It's still converting on Zoom, so I hesitate. We might have a bit of buffering, but it's nearly done now.
Okay, cool, no problem. So right now it's just me and Rob. It's, in terms of the hosts that are usually here, we might have Vinay or Henry jump on here in the next few minutes, but we're going to get started with the session, and you can kind of see how things go. And yeah, again, excited to see you here. I was just telling Deb I talked to you, and I said, well, I don't know if he's going to show up today, and then he chimed right in.
Deb. Hello, Deb.
Hey, how are you? Love the episode.
Well.
It was Mark just interviewed me a second time, and I really, really loved the second interview. It was amazing. It's really, really good. Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Definitely send a link, or if you have it or whatever, put it in the chat or just email it to me.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, cool. So we're live on Facebook right now for anyone who's watching. But I'll give a quick introduction for anybody that might not be familiar with what we're doing, and then we'll dive right in. So just to give you information about what this is a business podcast mastermind, started with a few talented friends in the business and podcasting space who expanded it to create a weekly event where a wider audience can join. Right here besides me with the new media show thing in the background there, that's Rob Greenlee. He is the VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn. He's chair of the Podcast Academy, and he is the co-host of that new media show, longtime evangelist in the podcasting industry. I'll give you a little bit of lowdown on the other folks that may show up as the co-hosts here. Henry Lopez, he's a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of the top-rated How of Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. Vinay Koshi, he's the host of Predictable B2B podcast, founder of Sproutworth. He helps others achieve predictable business growth and influence through content marketing. And then I'm Ethan Janney. I'm a business and executive coach and co-host of the Run With It podcast, which invites 7+ figure entrepreneurs to share business ideas and the action steps to launch them. And without further ado, I'll sort of dive into the session here. So basically what we're doing today is doing a bit of a review from last week. Last week we had Phil Palucha come on the show, and he's host of the Billionaires and Boxers podcast, but also involved in other media projects related to that brand. And he came on and talked a bit about his methodologies, his strategies, his tips, and so on and so forth. And typically what we like to do in these sessions is kind of review how that session went, think about some takeaways, think about ways we might apply some of the tips and tricks that he had shared. One that came out to me when I jumped in, I actually had to be in and out of the session last week, but when I jumped in, I noticed he gave this tip around how to improve the searchability of the content for your podcast. And he had said, if you're going to have someone on and they're going to talk about a specific topic, you can Google around that topic and find other similar searches, keywords, questions, phrases that people might actually tend to search around that topic, and then plan your questions that you ask the guest around that, so that when you do put your show notes or you put your transcript online, then it automatically adds some optimized SEO for the podcast episode. I thought that was very clever. First of all, has anybody tried that or thought of doing that yet? I don't know. Deb, have you considered it?
I think already in our show notes that get published with the podcast, there's already keywords that the social media person does that would resonate. So we already do that. But one thing you triggered here that I don't do, and some podcasters do, is they post the full transcript. I have been preserving that for myself for reuse and content, but I'm wondering how helpful will that be for SEO searchability versus, 6 to 8, keywords. I'm curious because I don't want to do the extra work if just, putting the right hashtags with it will be sufficient.
Yeah, I know that a few people who seem to be having success with their projects tend to create separate pages for each podcast episode.
I know Henry does that.
Yeah. And I think he's recommended it for those of us that don't do that yet. I see you nodding over there, Rob. Have you had any experience with this, or do you do that for your shows, or have you seen people have success doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it creates a topic landing page that you can target with keywords that will come up in search results as your domain gets more important to Google. One thing that is also important that, more from a technical perspective, that helps you in the search engines, and I'm sure Todd will go into this next time, but is to have the domain name that you're using for your website be on a secure connection. And that's basically HTTPS. I mean, a lot of the search engines now are prioritizing websites that have secure connections. So it's more of a technical distinction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it allows you to build kind of a landing page for a topic or keywords that you can map to an episode that then is food for Google to present in keyword searches. So and you can also target that landing page in your marketing and social media campaigns too as a place to go that can be almost like a launching off point over to subscribing on a variety of different platforms too. So, and then you can add context, more written context to the episode as well.
I think that's on my to-do list. I had met with Henry and he does it. So all I need to do, again, a little time and money, but with my web designer, just create a series of pages that I can copy paste for each episode and do that in the future. So appreciate that. That's for the future.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. It's always another layer of work, right?
I know. I need more people.
Right. Oh,
I do have a sense that the transcripts are kind of
it's part of it. It's part of that.
Yeah, it's part of it in kind of a bonus text, right? It's like you don't have to recreate. You don't have to create new text necessarily. You could say, okay, there was a text that was created by this discussion. I know that when it comes down to people doing searches, it's not just keywords. Sometimes it's phrases or questions, a very specific question. I know when I, as a sort of pseudo digital native, I've just noticed that I've been trained to use Google like in a certain way that other people might not be as intuitive for. And that is just, if I have a question, I just ask the question, like write it right into the Google thing. And I think that has tended to be a way that Google categorizes various content, that there's actual questions that people ask or phrases that they put in, and there's actually related phrases. I've been working with some digital marketing apprentices through the Acadium website, and I'll have them, and again, I'm not an expert with SEO or any of this, but I know that they're studying it right now. And so as I'm writing a blog article, they'll say, okay, Ethan, we're going to go and do some research around what do people say. So then I might say, I'm going to write an article on starting a business during quarantine or something like that. Yeah. And they'll come back to me and say, okay, but how about we change the title to, how can I pivot during quarantine or something like that. And so it's just interesting to find out what people search that are like what you're doing and get the phrases in there. It's not just the words, it's the phrases. So
yeah, I mean,
it's useful.
It's more art than I mean, there's a lot of science to it too. I mean, I think I mentioned on the last episode that there are sites you can go to. One's called keywordseverywhere.com, that you can actually find out what people are actually searching for in relation to the keyword phrase that you're using, right? So maybe you can make that adjustment. But phrases are better because just using one word as your focus can oftentimes be a little too broad, and you can't come up high in the search results. So getting a little bit more into the phraseology can help you with the organic search, but this strategy also works with paid search too. So you could play the game with buying some keywords in the sponsored links area of Google as well, using the same strategy. I know some podcasters have thought that, using these tools like the keywords, airword type tools can help you come up with topics for your show too that maybe map to what people are searching for. So it can be used in a reverse marketing approach as well. But I think there's a little bit of danger zone that you basically shape the content of your show based on what people are searching for. And that may not be what's natural or organic to what you need to do for your show. So it's walking that line.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I went on the podcast movement virtual 1 or 2 weeks ago, and they were saying that the 3 most popular ways to find a new podcast or find a podcast is one is word of mouth, one is social media, and the third one, which surprised me, was actually Google SEO. So it just shows that it is incredibly powerful when people are finding podcasts or researching about podcasts.
Well, if I think about it, yeah, I attended that session, and what was surprising was that the search one came up number 1 this time, which it hadn't been up for all the years. It had been word of mouth was number 1, but now it's search, and I think it has a lot to do with Google getting into the game more. Right.
Yeah, I was just going to interject that just to reiterate the thing with the podcast transcript, which we actually don't do at the moment, but is then you have at least there's phrases, right? You may not have the exact phrases that people are searching for, but now there's phrases that you used in a context where you're talking about a topic that people might care about, and you don't necessarily have to make them for SEO purposes, but you have the full phrases now in text, so that if Google's looking around and they, say, so how do tell the listeners, how did they start a business during a quarantine, or something like that. So right there, then you get the text and it's just reprinted on the page. Google doesn't do a very good job of searching audio, right? Its text is its right. main thing. So then people can find you and find the episode.
So just when you were saying having a landing page for every episode, because I know some of the hosting platforms do that for you and you can promote on social media and various places, right. But are you actually saying your own website, or are you saying the hosting platform?
Yeah, I mean, it could be either one, but it depends on what your bigger strategy is. I mean, building your own website off of your own domain name has a unique opportunity as well, to be really your hub for your show.
Yeah, I think it's a must, right. A must do.
Right.
Hey, Henry.
Hey,
it's on my to-do list. Don't worry.
I know it is. I mean, listen, if you listen to all the first of all, just to add to that, more and more when I ask people how they found me, it's because they did a Google search.
Right.
And I know my SEO is great, not because anything magical I've done. It's just 4 years of content, and I do a page, not a blog post, but an actual page. There are some people who argue there's some slight differences there. I don't know about that. A page for every episode. And all those pages will contain anything from a transcript. I've done that sometimes, but at a minimum, it includes my outline of topics and questions. So there's a lot of content relative with, and I'm conscious of those keywords that I'm wanting people to find me by, small business coach, how to start a business, how to become your own boss, all of those phrases. I'm conscious of making sure that my pages are full of those as much as makes sense contextually, right?
Are you on, you may have said this before, Henry, are you on WordPress?
I am.
Okay. And I was just, giving some pros for publishing your transcript on those type of pages, but I don't know, like you said, you do it sometimes you don't.
I do, but my challenge has been, I know there's a bunch of different sites that do it for free. The accuracy is pretty bad. I struggle sometimes with how junky it can be. And, at least I haven't found one that's free that does an excellent job. So I'd been doing that for a while, and then I stopped, probably for no real reason. And I just, so many other things I'm trying to do and getting an episode out. But I get it. I mean, certainly it gives you some incredibly valuable content with all of those key phrases. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know how you're going about it. I just know from one thing for Henry's website, that I've noticed. It's not just a podcast website. It's kind of a small business website, and so that people can find some kind. Like I've seen you wrote a post at the beginning of quarantine about how to get those loans that the government was offering.
Correct. Yeah.
And just
right. So
giving
the
people
idea is that
appropriate
there are
information.
resources, and of course, I'm trying to get people to come and go to my either schedule a coaching call or go to one of my online courses or my affiliates. Right. But the other point that Rob's making that I've been taught, and it makes sense. How else am I going to build if I'm dependent on somebody else's platform for my access back to those listeners? Then that's not going to work. I need to get hopefully an email address from them so that I can reach back out to them on a consistent basis.
Well, and we were kind of, this is all coming from talking about Phil Palucha's suggestion around, preloading your questions for your episode with SEO friendly terms. What are people searching for? And now before I interview somebody, I can ask the questions so that their questions people want answered get answered. A couple of things on that, just to give a devil's advocate or an alternative to this sort of stacking the deck for SEO purposes is kind of like listicle or, almost like clickbaity headlines, and the fact that they kind of promise something, right, that people are searching for. Totally useful stuff we had, but sometimes not. And sometimes it kind of turns people off, right? It's another listicle. Okay, great. I don't have very much respect for this content.
But you say that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but nonetheless, it's kind of like with price anchoring. We all know it's being done, but it still works. Yeah. That's
I
what
was
I'll say
just going to say this one thing that I found interesting. Our most recent podcast guest that we recorded, it's not published yet. We had Aileen Lerner on. She owns a business that helps computer programmers prepare for interviews with the top tech companies, Google, Facebook, things like that. They do these blind interviews so that they can try their hand with an actual interviewer from these companies but do it anonymously, and then eventually connect with them for an actual job interview once they feel comfortable that they could do a good job. Anyways, I've noticed that she's had some success going in the opposite direction, just meaning that she really puts a lot of effort into doing research-based and even I can't remember exactly how she put it, but like almost like statistics based, like numeric based articles, right? Where one of her most popular articles was she found out, I don't know if she did the study herself or she found it somewhere else, but they found that resumes, they compared resumes and what differentiated the people's resumes that got chosen versus the ones that didn't. And it was a statistical analysis of that, and they found out that really one of the biggest factors was the number of typos. And so her audience is people who are trying to get a job, right? And of course, nobody really actually think that that's very fair, to be honest, right? Because you might have a computer programmer who's quite good, but they're coming from another country. They can spell all the terms that they need to in their programming language just fine, but you might not be able to put together a sentence very well. So that's very interesting to her readers, and it's sort of new numbers based. It's research based. It's based on data. So I thought that was interesting as an alternative to strategizing how you write articles. I think part of that is based on that people find that extra care to be important, but also that's her audience. They're computer programmers. They might care a little bit more about data and some sort of evidence-based content. Anything else for you, Henry, that you took away from that interview with Phil Palucha?
I was just looking at my notes, and he talked about, I think you had asked him how to continue to grow the show. I have my note as how to grow organically. I don't know if that's how you phrased it, but his two things were having guests, that network effect, and appearing on other shows. It might have been related to that question, but from my experience, I have to concur certainly that I think one of the biggest things that got me to the level I'm at now, as far as followers, has been the guest approach. And again, we've talked about this quite a bit on this mastermind about which one should I do, or should I do a mix? But I know that was one of the ways I was able to grow my show, is by having people on who'll then share it with their network. And so I think Phil spoke to that. It resonated with me that you never know who's listening or who they're exposed to that then becomes a fan of your show. I've been trying to get on more shows, but I have found it interestingly a little difficult isn't the right word. It's almost like, I don't know, maybe it is difficult. I haven't had as much success getting on shows as I thought it was going to be, as easy as I was going to be, but it hasn't been as easy.
Can I just do a little pitch? And I apologize for selling, but
we're all friends.
I've just launched a business this week where we've got a podcast agency with one of my podcast guests. And we've gone into business to have an agency to find guests for podcasts. We've got a bank of about 400-500 podcasts that either I've been involved in or my business partner has been on as well. And we're sort of pitching to entrepreneurs, business owners, either 24 episodes per year, 48 episodes per year, or a more corporate, which might be a sort of a company that wants different parts of their business exposed to podcasts. So it could be a CEO, it could be a CFO or a COO or whoever. So I know there are businesses out there. We've done our research and worked out where they are and what they're doing. But yeah, so Henry, if you would like to, I can send you our PDF and sort of website if that sort of helps, because there are those businesses out there.
Yeah, no, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and of course there are booking agencies that charge a fee, like I think is what you're describing. Yeah. In fact, I think that was our first guest, was Jessica's partner at Interview Connections, right?
Yeah,
Margie, right?
Margie, yeah. That's right.
I know. Yeah,
but thank you for that. Yes.
So Henry, just curious to follow up on that. What do you feel has been difficult? Has it been finding the right ones, getting to say yes?
It's finding the right ones. And I think it is the reason you end up maybe paying somebody to do it is the time, the effort, the outreach effort. Yeah. So I just think I haven't blocked out enough time to be methodical about it.
Mm-hmm.
But even when I go through, so I'm trying to stay obviously in my niche in small business. When I go exhaust the list of podcasts, I don't know, it just seems like I've reached out to most of them. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of a more concerted effort on putting together a campaign. And doing it.
One of the things that actually someone that I spoke to who has done it very organically and not employed a business he said is to ask whenever you're on a podcast, do you know anyone in your area? And he said, I know that sounds silly, but it's a very easy way, because everyone who does a podcast will know somebody else that does a podcast, and it's a very natural way of doing it without having the sort of paid behind.
Yeah, and that's a great idea. I am getting a lot more pitches where it's a swap kind of thing, so I'm seeing that more often now as well. It's just if I don't want them on my show, then I don't want to
be on there.
Take them up on the one side of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting topic, because I did that with one of my guests, again, trying to get something out of it. And even if we couldn't do business together, I said, do you know of some great podcast hosts? And the interesting thing was that I got two items. One is just not in line with my brand, so I have to somehow let them down nicely. The other one could be, it's a mixed blessing, Yes, people refer you, but they may not necessarily be somebody you want to do business with or collaborate with. So it's hard, but again, sometimes they're pre-vetted and they could actually be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is an interesting topic. I mean, I've played on all sides of that topic. I've had a 1-year campaign through the Interview Connections folks. And then I backed away from that. And then So I did like 200 interviews with them over a year, and then I backed away from it because it got to a point where it was like maybe a little oversaturation because I mean, you think about oftentimes, you talk about the same things over and over and over again, and
Right.
online distribution goes everywhere, right? So it's almost like it's not like in radio in the radio days where you do a radio interview and it's local, right? These are kind of available everywhere, so you get a lot of redundancy if you do a lot of these. So what I've been doing, I do about 2 to 3 a week right now. I kind of try and space them out a little bit, and I've been on shows like had nothing to do with podcasting, ones like design, right, or fashion or something like that. And oftentimes what the host wants to talk about is what's what can be done with their podcast in a different genre, right? And so they're actually looking for almost like consulting in their podcast about what they can do or what's going on in podcasting in their industry. And it really kind of, it forces you to kind of think outside of the box of when you go on a podcast, what are you bringing to that podcast that's unique or different compared to the last interview that I did last week, right? Instead of saying the same thing over and over again. So that's one of the things that I've found over doing many, many years of these.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just flip it around with selecting the right podcast guest. Again, the leading thing is to bring great content to my listeners, build loyalty. I get something out of it. But I think I've done just too good a job with just interviewing anybody. And what I found is that a lot of the guests, they say, hey, thanks for having me on the show once you actually publish it, but don't do a lot of reciprocation in terms of promotion, commenting, sharing with their network. And I'm just wondering if there are any techniques you use to pre-vet them without saying, well, if you want to be on my podcast, you need to kind of like share it all over social media versus somebody that genuinely is going to be generous with sharing the information around. Any insights in that area?
Well, just keep in mind too that if you're getting on guests that are on a lot of podcasts, one of the thing is that you're asking them to share something to their community that can be, maybe their community can find it to be redundant, and that I think is one of the, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is that if you have very popular guests on your show, sometimes the same topics come up, and if they're sharing it to their community, basically the same interview over and over and over again, it can be, it maybe isn't good for their brand. So I don't, that's the difficult walk here. If they don't promote it, then they're actually getting new people becoming aware of them instead of, causing some almost like an echo chamber effect of their guesting on your podcast. So it may work against them to some degree. Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A couple of things one that I've seen and one that I do, Deb. One that I've seen when I've been a guest is some people have a questionnaire. I haven't done this because I don't know that I like it. But then in that questionnaire, it'll ask, how do you plan to promote your appearance on my show?
I've seen that.
To me, that's a little too forceful, too forward. It doesn't work for me, but that's one way I've seen it done. Right. What I do is when I send my email that I send this morning to the guest who was on today, I ask them and I help them by giving them some graphics. So I create a unique graphic to promote the show, and I also send my logo, and I include that in case you wanted to use them. Here I've attached a couple of graphics. So I think that helps to facilitate them maybe, and I've seen it sometimes, I don't know what percentage, a small percentage, but I'll go afterwards and see that they've put it on their website. I think, though, it's to Rob's point, it's not going to be those people that have been on 50 shows. It's going to be those people that are excited to tell everybody about the fact that they just got interviewed on some podcast, right? But that's what I do is I ask for it in my email and provide them with some content that will help them promote it.
All right. So that's a quick little tip. I'm not sure if in my thank you note to each of my guests, do I explicitly state that. I certainly share the assets and ask them just before the show, but in the thank you, I may want to add that as well. Thank you.
Yeah. And what I've done is, I just have a template, and I'm more than happy to share the template. Yeah.
Cool.
If there's some kind of something unique about the interview, and that's what I would talk to the guest about too, is there some topic in there that they haven't talked about in other podcasts before. I mean, I kind of find it exciting when I can get on a podcast and I can dive into other areas. Like here recently, I did a podcast with a show talking about green energy, right? It's certainly not up my alley of what people typically think of me of having knowledge about, but trying to tap into something about them that's unique to them. It's also a way to get them to put out different kinds of content out to their community too, and they're more likely to promote it, I think. So it's a complex balance. It kind of really depends on who the guest is and what their profile is, and bringing value to your show plus bringing value to their community. I mean, to really do it right is complicated, I think.
But I will say, Mark Hayward asks a lot of unique questions.
Yeah.
Totally catches you off guard. So
Yep.
there is always something unique about what one shares on the show.
Right. That's great.
Sorry, Deb. I didn't mean to put you on your toes.
Hey, sometimes the best things come out when you least expect it.
That's right.
Yeah. For me, it's the research side, which is, I think, for me that's critical phase.
Right.
To even have a good guest is being able to have a structure. See, I think what Deb's alluding to is, so I have a structure, but equally I'm happy to go off on sort of tangents if it's interesting, especially if the person is interested in it and they've got an angle that might be slightly different. So yeah, I've been on podcasts as a guest, and there's like 3 questions that they ask everyone, the same questions, and there's consistency there, and I get it, but for me it doesn't work for being an enjoyable experience.
So
first question should always be, tell me a little bit about you.
Right.
Sometimes that can be a little bit too open-ended.
Yeah,
and probably
exactly.
don't allow your guests to introduce themselves either.
No, I don't like that approach. But
control that.
Yeah.
Right.
Related to that, though, Phil mentioned that he does a pre-call before every interview. What are y'all's thoughts? I don't do that for all kinds of reasons, but was curious what y'all's thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I love
100%.
I love
always.
pre-calls, actually.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's where the magic comes.
Well, it depends on if you know the person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But why, Deb? Why do you do the pre-call?
Because I want to find where the magic is, because I find that, we come from 2 different worlds. We don't know each other. There is some points of commonality, but somehow I find the connection between our two businesses. And then I know to pull that forward because it's going to be unique and not the typical talking points. And so that is what makes it magical. It looks like we've been friends for years, and it adds to the flow versus the awkwardness of a first date.
Right. Yeah.
That's my reason. It works for me.
We don't do it. And I kind of like to it. There is a time constraint there. I have been thinking lately that like phone calls, like I don't do a lot of phone calls anymore, but I feel like it feels awkward, but it also feels like it would be an interesting thing for a phone call, because I like to do Zoom calls, video calls with a lot of different things. Just call, check in. Hey, what's up? I don't know if people are going to answer their phone, or maybe we can schedule a phone call. But I have a feeling that could be useful if they're up for it. I think my main hesitation for the pre-interviews is bothering, right? Oh man, we already taken up some of your time for this podcast. You got a busy week. And now I'm asking you to get on the phone again. I guess that was that's my resistance.
I don't tend to do it. But there's a couple of people that I've been sort of recommended, not as sort of podcast people, but as sort of interested. One was an author, and I can't remember what the other person was. I think he was a coach or something. And they are they're not on the podcast merry-go-round. So they both asked me for a 30-minute pre-call. And I think I've got both of them this week. But I'm a little bit like you, Ethan. I'm kind of like, well, I'm taking an hour out, sometimes longer, depending on people's time frames. I'm taking over an hour of people's time with these podcasts. I kind of feel a little bit like you, that a bit guilty to then take up 30 minutes sort of pre-call as well.
I wonder if some of it's of self-perception, though. I mean, It's
Yeah, I
almost
was
like,
gonna
well,
say.
if you think that you're got a good enough thing going to have a pre-call, then they might be okay with it. Like a good example I'm thinking of is we had Ari Desormeaux, who helps with the Big Searchy podcast on our first session, and she was the pre-call person that would do calls with people before the main host would do it. And I mean, number one, that's also another level of being like, we're going to take your time, but you're not going to talk to the host. uh, uh,
Yeah,
but
that
that show has some people on it that are very busy people. You know, they've had Jimmy Wales, from Wikipedia, I think, and various very successful entrepreneurs that have quite tight schedules. So, I mean, maybe, I guess what I'm seeing is that there may be room to say, yes, if you're not going to play it at a certain level, it is going to be a waste of people's time. But if you're going to go ahead and play it at a certain level, which also may require the pre-call, then they actually might appreciate it, that we're planning and we're going to make it a good episode. And this is a serious thing that they're getting involved in, That's an interesting question. While I'm chatting here, I'll just cut back to something. I don't know if this is going to be super useful, but it seems like an interesting thing to try with getting other people to promote after they've been on the show. I know for myself, and I know for some other people, oftentimes they have a social media person. And for me, even, I have social media people that are working on things. And if I don't even have the time to tell them, hey, I was on this podcast, go promote it, right? So one thing to do, maybe on a questionnaire that I think could be relatively non-intrusive, is just to say, do you have a social media person that you want to put me in direct contact with? Give me their email and name. And then that way, because oftentimes those people do have the time and energy, they're just kind of waiting to have content and put things together. You can just communicate with them directly, oh, hey, here's some collateral, go ahead. And then it saves the person time who is on the show and energy and thinking about it. But then they also get the benefit of having done it, and you get the benefit of having done the promo. I'm having a feeling that might be an interesting route to go.
Yeah, I picked up that as well from Paul. In fact, I'm going to be connecting with him, I think, in a week from now, just to pick his brain a little bit. But definitely, I find when I'm going to be connecting with those PR people or social media, because like you said, sometimes the guests just don't have the time. And then it's kind of a letdown when you thought it was like a really great episode.
Yeah, we had a share recently on David Hauser is one of our favorite guests. He's a very successful entrepreneur from Grasshopper, multi-million-dollar sale of that company. And I noticed he just happened to share on his Twitter like months and months later, oh yeah, I was on this podcast, go check it out. And I was like, we didn't ask him to do that or anything. I feel like that's rare, and I don't even know, maybe it was because he thought it was a unique episode or something. I appreciated that, but I think it's hard to get people to kind of just out of the blue share a thing here and there. Sorry, I think I cut somebody off. Somebody was about to say something.
No, I was going to say that another thing that sparked that I do is about 2 or 3 months later. It just depends. I'll go back and get the download numbers for that episode, and then I send a follow-up email saying, hey, just checking in. Want to let you know your episode has been downloaded X number of times. And I've had a couple of times say, oh, that's great. I'll make sure to put it back into my promotion rotation, which kind of speaks to what you're talking about, that a lot of some of these people, if they are, I don't know what the term is, celebrity level, whatever, in their particular industries, have somebody doing, or they're a business person that's busy, they have somebody doing their social media. But that's another technique that I found has helped, obviously, later to get a little bit more out of them to promote the episode.
That's a great tip.
Another thing, which I think maybe this is a question people already ask, maybe there's another way to ask it in terms of trying to make the episode unique. And then maybe I'd like to dive in a little bit to ask that question about how unique do things need to be. But we started asking up front, like, what do you want to get out of this, session? Like, what would make this a big win for you, or what would make you happy about this? And I think that that's at least an interesting question to ask. And then a place they may say something like generic, well, I'm always trying to send people to my, website. You could prod a little bit more. Okay, yeah, but what about after that? Or is there anything that's going on for you right now? And try to take it in a unique direction, right? And I guess I wanted to throw out this to the group because I don't know if there are really precedents for this yet, because we're dealing with so much in terms of old media stuff, right? How, let's say I'm going on other podcasts, how much do I want to toe the party line and just say the same thing that I say on every once, because you want there to be a solid message? And how much do you want to like have, this unique thing over here, and this episode was, oh, well, that was cool because that had that going on. I'm curious to ask Rob, because I think you might have an opinion on this. Like, is there a magic balance? Because I feel like you can't go too far in one or the other direction. You can't always say the same stupid thing,
Right.
but you also can't like just talk about whatever every time you're on anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to how you as a guest and the host have shaped the expectation of what the episode's going to cover, right? With your interview. I mean, I think that there's equal responsibility on the guest side and the host side, but at the end of the day, it's the host's show, right? So, what they want to talk about always takes priority. I can suggest things and give them ideas. But at the end of the day, if they have a vision, or maybe they haven't heard the last 5 interviews that I've done, which oftentimes is the case too, then they'll go ahead and ask those same questions that has been asked of me, in the last 10 podcasts. And that's what's not necessarily, I don't have a lot of control over that. So, I can influence that, but it is a collaborative thing. And that's one of the big reasons why I do the pre-interviews. Typically, at least if I think in my past,
I have a lot of control over that.
Is basically trying to make sure that
we're getting an echo from you, Rob, for some reason.
I can shape those conversations. It's probably my headphones popped out. I can shape those conversations with the host, and then as a guest, I'd love to do them too, because it allows for rapport to be built. And maybe I can influence them to talk about different aspects of their topic area. And that's what happened with the show that I was on about fashion. Was, they just wanted to have me on so they could, talk about podcasting. But I was like, well, let's talk about podcasting in the context of fashion, right? So trying to make it unique. And so they could promote my show and hopefully get a different kind of listener listening to the show, and not just the people that necessarily want to just start a podcast. So, yeah.
I want to go back and ask you, Rob. I remember you said you did 200 guest spots in a year. I'm curious, was that something that is just general? Is that initiated by Libsyn somehow? Like, hey, we want you to get.
Well, that happened
there.
back when I was working for Spreaker. So we did a marketing campaign back in that time frame. This was like in probably 2017, 18 time frame, where I did that, and it was just basically a blast of as many podcasts as I could be on over a year period of time. And I've probably been on over 500 podcasts. So, I mean, if I total them all up online, and a lot of them are very similar to each other. And that's the part that I'm conscious of now. And I think a lot of these big name guests that, many of us are talking about trying to get on our podcast are probably in a similar situation by now. So trying to find something unique to talk about them probably requires a little bit more engagement with them, and whether or not they have the time to do it is a big question mark, right? But that would be really great to do, I think, going forward. I mean, I'm really pushing for it going forward myself.
This is one of the advantages that our show has, because it's about bringing a new business idea to the table. By definition, they're not going to have brought that new business idea to some other show. And we're collaborating now with Cortland from Indie Hackers, who we're in his network now. So he'll listen to our episodes and give us some feedback. And, he's like, yeah, don't ask them the questions that other people have asked them. I want unique things. I want numbers. He says, I want numbers, numerical estimations of things as an entrepreneur. I want trends. I want insights per minute. He often talks about, I want something unique and interesting to check out every minute. I've translated that into kind of if you think about at least pausing and looking it up, right, then it's probably a good tidbit to have in an episode. But yeah, I'm wondering, for us, we're almost trying the opposite thing. Like, we've got it very unique, but we're trying to add other research in and do other things. But I'm just thinking, for people who have the more typical, I'm having you on, I just want to talk about you and your experience. I think there's maybe something to be said for at least part of the episode or some tangent of it to say, this is something on this show that we always do that nobody else does, you know?
And I get
powerful.
pulled into those situations many times too, where every episode, they have a series of questions that they ask their guests that are, completely off the topic of podcasting or anything like that. They were just like, what was your experience in high school, or something like that. Right. And what the show can do at that point too, is they could create like a unique kind of like audiogram for the show as well. That they can use through like a headliner type of platform too, where they can embed something that's kind of interesting that can hook people into checking out their show or something too. So, yeah.
We've also gotten the feedback, although that we might want to ask unique questions, that we also might not want to ask questions that we are not sure what kind of answer they're going to give.
Right.
Because it could just create an awkward moment. So I can see how that's useful to combine the research aspect with the unique question aspect and go, here's something it seems like they have expertise on, or something specific that, they have insider information about, and they've given an inkling that they have more info on it, but they haven't talked about it extensively. Let me dive in there and ask them that thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Why wouldn't you ask them something that you're not exactly sure where it's going to go? Because sometimes spontaneity and catching somebody off guard can create something unique. You never know what you're going to get from it.
Yeah, that's true.
I ask all kinds of questions I don't know the answer to. It's one of the reasons we're not live, right? So if it goes horribly bad, which has only happened a couple of times, then I can edit it.
That's why it's important to listen as a host, right? You have to listen for those little
nuggets,
cracks, right? That the guest will expose about themselves, and then just dive right in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting. I know it's definitely an interesting thing to reflect on, and I am bringing this to the table because it's advice that we've been getting in terms of asking these questions, and I don't think it's necessarily that you know what the answer is going to be. But that it's not just a random question that may not be relevant to the individual. So for example, with this guest we had on last time, Aileen Lerner, she had expertise in hiring, and HR stuff, right? So we could jump in and say, hey, what do you think about crypto lately, by the way? And she might be like, it'd give kind of an awkward answer. It could be useful to bring in something like as a fun thing to ask people. But the advice was more like, ask something very interesting from her around HR, or ask her about some gossip around, the hiring process at big tech companies. That
what you can ask about politics, right?
Politics.
Ooh, let's go there.
That'll change the show.
Actually, we're going to have a guest.
Kidding, of course.
We're going to have a guest. Hopefully he'll come on the show. I went on his podcast and he talked about politics, and he was on the opposite side of the aisle. Let's just say that.
From you mean?
From me. And then, he's going to come on our podcast, and I didn't say that we would talk about politics, but I'm very interested to see where that goes.
So who is our next guest? Do we have a guest for next week?
Yes. Yeah, we have Rob's going to bring on his buddy, Todd Cochran. from Blueberry.
He's very outspoken about SEO and podcasting. So
Yeah.
and he
try to
runs
make it for that. I may not be on, so if you don't see me,
Okay.
that's going to be a good one though.
Mm.
I'm curious to ask Mark, anything that you're particularly working on right now. I mean, you and I talked about you're working on just trying to grow your podcast, get more listeners. You've got these other businesses going on. Anything you're curious, questions or topics to bring to the table here to throw out?
Well, actually, I've resisted advertising for a long time. So I've been doing this for about 3 years, and I've resisted so far because I was always unconvinced that I was going to get the right type of product to sell. And actually, this afternoon I was on my hosting platform, and I was having a chat, like a live chat with someone. And she said to me, like, why don't we just trial it and offer you a couple? Because I've gone to more external versions of advertising, where today I went through my hosting platform, and I thought it was interesting. She was like, look, let me see what our community within she asked me sort of demographic questions of my audience, and I've let her loose to try and find some advertising slots. So for me, that's a very pressing thing, because I'm very, very conscious that I don't, as I said to you, Ethan, I don't want to start advertising something which has nothing to do with business. And for me, that's a concern of mine. So as I said, I've let the hosting platform loose, and she's going to come back to me in a couple of days once she's got some ideas of potential clients and products to be able to do. So that for me is a very immediate thing. But for just wider, I think I struggle sometimes when you get the right guest and you don't always get it to pop, because i.e. they don't always send out, they don't always share. So I experienced that, and we've talked about that this evening, and ways of being able to do that, and actually that sort of follow-up email and sort of checking in, and perhaps giving some sort of some links and some shares, this is where it's going to be, and stuff like that, actually might be a really powerful thing to engage my guests post podcast, because they all seem to have fun and sort of like it's all very positive at the end of it, but actually they don't always share as much. And I get that if they're doing 50 a month, then they're going to struggle to find something unique and to share with their audience. But that's actually been very useful. So I think I'm going to start employing that.
What do you do now when you release an episode? What do you communicate back to the guest?
So I tell them that when it's going to be released, and because primarily they're business people, I say that I'm going to tag you in on LinkedIn, and that I've had good success on people sharing, because the people that I release on I release on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, but I only ever tag people in on LinkedIn because that's where my audience is.
But you don't send them an email currently?
No, not at the moment. And it's been an interesting challenge tonight, because I think it's and equally getting people off of social media and actually into email can be very, very powerful. People respond, and we were saying like social media managers, but most people look at their emails, even if they don't look at all of their emails, they look at some of their emails. So I think that's definitely something
and when you post about the episode on those platforms, you're tagging them if they're on those platforms, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that right, Mark?
Yes, that's exactly it. And sort of with the hope and the expectation that they will share, and some do.
Yeah, and you depending on what platform they're on, you will. And you're doing that. I mean, I only post once on my Facebook page, but numerous times on Twitter, only once on LinkedIn. And on all of those are my 3 platforms right now, for no other necessary reason than time. But if they are on those platforms, then I tag them. And it just depends on where they're most active, right?
Yeah, yeah, and most of my people are most active on LinkedIn. I generally see that on once we've connected that most people that I speak to look at their LinkedIn, like maybe not every day, but look at their LinkedIn rather than even Facebook. A lot of these people have it but don't use it as a sort of business leverage, and part of what I try and do is sort of showcase people's businesses and sort of let them really sell to my audience in a very gentle, nice way. So it's sort of in their interest, if they want to publicize their business, to do it, to share it that way.
Have you had we'll be signing off here in a quick second, but have you had Joe Apfelbaum on your show?
No.
I know him. What about
You know
him?
him?
Because I've seen him.
such a
He's
great
pretty
guest.
crazy out there, vocal.
Yes.
Why should
Well,
we consider him?
Well, I heard of him from Henry because he went on Henry's show, and I'm reckoning him from Mark's show just because he said he uses LinkedIn a lot. Because I know the thing that, you know, he's a digital kind of marketing guy who started a company that was an Inc. 500, 5,000 fast growing companies, all that stuff. But he's especially into LinkedIn right now, you know. So I feel like not only would he be an interesting guest to ask him about how LinkedIn works for him and how he makes connections on LinkedIn and posts content, but you know, you'll share it, you'll tag him on LinkedIn, he'll share it, you know.
I've got a guy who's a LinkedIn, he worked for LinkedIn for 4 years or 5 years, and then is doing his own sort of marketing stuff. And actually I've got him in, I think it's next week or later on this week, to talk directly about LinkedIn as a sort of product for promoting stuff. So hopefully that'll be interesting as well.
Hey, Ethan, what we're talking, we allow me to share. I'll share my email quick, but I will say with Joe, he is the single guest where I could definitively tell that he created a bump in my downloads for that episode. I mean, it was because he's got, at the time, this was a couple years ago when he was on my show, he shared with me, he has a mailing list of like email list of like 50,000 plus. It's probably greater than that now. And it's amazing. He, at least at the time, I don't know if he's still doing that. If he's a guest on your show, he'll send it out to that list and they will listen. He's got an incredible list of loyal followers.
Right, awesome.
Yeah, at least check them out.
Yeah, I will.
So just for what it's worth, and I'm willing to share this with everybody, but this is my basic follow-up email, right? So it's I've crafted it over time. I tell them this is the preferred link I want them to use, which is that page on my website. That's what I'm hoping they will share. Yeah. And that's the challenge. If the only way I share it with them is through other platforms, then, you know, depends on where the link is. Early days, I was sharing the link to my iTunes at the time page, but then advice I got from a lot of people in thinking about it, I want people going to my website. And so then you don't see them here, but I attach the images I talked about, and then I ask for a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. And about 1 in every 10 people might go ahead and do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I basically do the same, and I wouldn't mind maybe sending to Ethan to share. I have a few nurturing emails that I send, you know, here's when it's going to be published, sharing their social media assets beforehand, thanking them for being a guest. So I nurture them a lot, maybe a bit, but I'd love to share mine. And Henry, I'd love to see a couple of your templates as well. Again, all trying to, hopefully they'll promote it when it comes out.
What I love about sending it ahead of time, Deb, I just don't have the time yet in my process, is that speaks to what Ethan was talking about, that if they do have somebody who's managing that for them, what I've heard is, get that to me ahead of time so we can put it into our schedule.
Yep.
I haven't done that, but I think that's really powerful because when they get my email Monday morning, it's probably too late for that week's of scheduled posts sometimes. Yep. But if you send it ahead of time, like you're doing, more likely that they can put it into their cycle of scheduling their media posts.
Yeah, I push the production company to get the assets to
me huge.
2 days ahead of time and share it right away with the guest.
That's a big deal, I think.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Cool. Anything else we want to cover before we jump off for today? All right.
Have a
So,
great Thanksgiving next week. For those of you, if I don't see you next week.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, next week is Thanksgiving. I keep
No,
having
it's
to
not.
check myself.
Is it?
Next week.
Well, next full week is Thanksgiving. So this Thursday would not be Thanksgiving. But
yeah,
then
next
following week. So next
This
week.
is the whole thing. I'm a computer
beginning of a
programmer,
week.
So next
Right.
week means next Monday, and not this Thursday.
Right.
But yes, next week.
Thank you
believe
very
it?
much. Thank
We're
you.
here.
Nice. Thanks for joining us, Mark. We'll be in
Thanks,
touch.
Paul. It's a pleasure.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
We'll catch
Bye, all.
you all later.
Bye.
Bye.